Hey, I'm Michael Dorinda,
And I'm Jake Bennett.
and welcome to episode 122 of the North Meet South web podcast.
Chicka chicka Janet. Okay, big news. Number one, shaved my mustache. That was big news number one. Big news number two, I am drinking a root beer float. And apparently, Michael has never in his life tasted root beer because it's
Mm,
not a thing in Australia.
yeah, we've got like shops that import those kinds of drinks here. You know, we've
hmm
got like American candy stores and things like that, and they import all of
hmm
that stuff en masse. But I don't know, root beer is just not something that I've
It's
ever
not
considered. Is
like
it a sweet or
so
is it
it's
like a
weird
bitter,
because
somewhere between like a sweet, like a
it
soda
is
pop
sweet.
and
It is sweet, but it is like there is different types of root beer. So
mm-hmm,
I was a root beer of the month sort of thing. I had that for a year one time
mm-hmm,
for my birthday, and so I'd get 4 root beers every month. It was awesome. But yeah, some of them are really bitter because these different flavor profiles that each root beer sort of has, but they're in different quantities.
yeah,
So some of them like have a really, really strong like black licorice flavor,
yeah,
which
like
to
a
me is
sarsaparilla.
disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do not like that flavor. But then there's a lot of other sort of flavors in there. Like spearmint is actually one of the flavors in there as well. So like if you have like
Mm-hmm.
one of those white and green little circle mints,
Yeah.
that taste is present in root beer. So it's a weird combination. I feel like it's almost like a cultural, like it tastes sweet to me, it tastes
Mm-hmm.
good to me, but I'm not sure if it would taste good to you on your first
Right.
bite, or not
Yeah.
first bite, first taste. The reason I said bite is because I was thinking of
Vegemite.
the same thing for you guys, Vegemite. Exactly.
Right.
Like to
Yeah.
you guys, it's like, oh yeah, this is good stuff. I grew up eating it, and for us, it's
Correct.
sort of like, oh boy, that's a different flavor profile that I've never really experienced before.
Yeah. So
And
it's like
so,
Stockholm syndrome, basically,
yeah,
but
maybe
for
maybe that's
food,
what it is.
for
But like,
horrible food.
yeah, yeah, I don't know. Like I like it. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think you'd probably like it, at least depending on which type you got.
Right.
Also, we were talking about this earlier, right? Is my favorite type of root beer that I tried that whole year was one called Moose Whiz,
Mm-hmm.
and they were sued and had to stop making it, and they had to change the name to Bear Whiz.
Moose whiz. It's
And
funny.
now it's $25 for a 4 pack, and then it costs $37 to ship it here. And I'm like, yeah, a little bit too rich, a little bit too rich for my blood.
That's a bit like basically anything here. Like if you want to buy something from the US, then you better be prepared to pay exorbitant shipping fees.
Yeah, it's let's see, what is it? 25 plus oops, 25 plus 37, and then divide that, yeah, by 4, and you're talking about, oh my gosh, why is it not doing working? Okay, yeah, that's like $15 a bottle.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
You're
Not
getting
worth it.
into alcohol although your alcohol is really cheap compared to what we have over here, I think, because we've got like our
Probably.
alcohol gets taxed. Um,
Mm.
so you'd expect a bottle. Like, what would you pay for like a bottle of beer or a can of?
Dude,
Or
I don't even know. Like
I suppose you
I
don't
don't
drink, do you?
drink. I don't drink, I have drank before, but I don't drink on the regular, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so for me to know like what's recent prices on like, you know, a bottle of beer, I have no idea. I just
Well,
couldn't even tell you.
let's look this up. Where do we buy beer? Like, if you were to go into like a Walgreens, right? Is that a thing?
Sure.
Is it
Sure.
pharmacy?
Yeah,
Is that a thing?
Walgreens.
Is that
Yeah. Yeah,
is that a
you could
place you
buy
can buy beer?
I'm not sure if you can. I'm
I don't know.
I'm not sure if you can. Walmart, I don't know.
Walmart? I don't know
Go
where.
buy beer at
Like,
Walmart. Like there's like,
what's your supermarket
yeah.
chain? What's the
Yeah,
one that
Walmart,
Amazon bought?
Meyer. Let's see here.
I suppose you've got Target as well, which is a bit different to our Target. Our Target's more like you'd go and buy clothes and toys and things like that. But your Target, you can do grocery shopping and things like that in there as well, right?
Okay, so like it looks like a 6 pack of Coors Light is like 7.27. It was just like the first thing that came up.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's like
Okay.
bottles, right?
So 30
And then like a
ounce.
24 pack of cans is $16.
Okay. Okay. So we
So
got here Coors Light, 4.2, 18 pack. You're paying $13.98, and then you pay. I guess your. Do you pay? You'd pay tax on that as well. So what are you
yeah, you'd pay tax on
in
it. So it's like
Chi-town?
depending on which state, probably
Yeah.
like 9%.
Okay, so let's say that 13 is now like $15 US, so we call that 20 Australian for an 18 pack.
Mm.
Now, if we go to Dan Murphy's, is where you would buy. I wonder if we can get Coors here. Cause probably not. It's not a thing. Is it a thing? Do we import it a bit? No,
Foster's. I
Coors.
should have looked up Foster's.
Foster's, right? Yeah. Cooper's Pale, because I'm from South Australia, so that's
So
what we drink
anyway,
here.
it's like maybe like what, $5 more? I don't know. There's Foster's.
There you go. Okay, so
Foster's is $2.48 a can.
$2.48 a can. So if we were to buy, here you go. This is a Cooper's Pale, a 24 pack. You're looking at $53. So we're paying twice as much for 6 extra bottles, basically. $4.79 each.
Dang.
Dang. So yeah, that's
pricey.
Yeah. So whatever. Hey, it's vegan apparently. There you go. The beer is vegan.
There you go. Hey, learn something new every day. So we do have a lot of good stuff to talk about today. Actually,
we do.
We've got some interesting bits we're gonna talk about. You had mentioned at the top before we got started that we were gonna talk. Oh, sorry. One more thing, real quick. Sorry, folks. So they don't have root beer, but they do have like not root beer floats, but like Coca-Cola floats, and they call those.
I call it a spider. And I couldn't get to tell you why. Like, why do we call it a spider drink? Regional names. In Australia and New Zealand, an ice cream float is known as a spider because once the carbonation hits the ice cream, it forms a spider web-like reaction. So there you go. So, I mean,
that makes sense.
It's typical that you'd have it with Coca-Cola. You can do it with like you could do it with any soft drink, any soda pop or whatever you guys want to call it over there.
Yeah.
Like it tastes fine. But your Coke is also different to what ours is because you use fructose syrup, I think, in yours, and we don't. So yours is a bit different in flavor. And I've been drinking Coke no sugar for 5 years, so would probably be disastrous anyway. But yeah, like I used to love it when I was younger. Like, and you'd get lime, well, not lime soft drink, but different
a lime spider.
But it's usually you would have just vanilla ice cream in a soft drink of some description.
In a soda, yeah, sure. It's a spider. Yeah, gotcha.
But then like I think the closest thing that we'd have to root beer in Australia is like creaming soda, which you also have, if I'm not you've got.
We don't call it creaming soda, we call it cream soda.
Yeah. And then you've got like vanilla cream soda and you've got brown cream soda and things like that.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
You don't know.
Yep.
I
mean, we have cream soda, and then you might have vanilla cream soda. Yeah, I guess cream soda isn't typically vanilla. Yeah, so you do. You'd have both, right?
Yeah, and there is there's a specific flavor of it that we get here that that you have over there, which is it's not Dr. Pepper.
Mug.
I'd have to see a picture of the can to know it if I saw it. But yeah, we get that imported over here, and it's
Gotcha.
Bundaberg makes it in Australia, which is a pretty nice one. It's
interesting. We have Bundaberg over here. I've seen some. I've had Bundaberg root beer before.
Right. Yeah. So Bundaberg is in Queensland. They make a burgundy creaming soda, which is made with I think red grapes maybe.
Oh, interesting.
Which is pretty nice. There's like Kirk's, Bundaberg, and Bigfoot are the ones that make it here.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's funny that they have Bundaberg root beer here, but you guys don't have Bundaberg root. You just have Bundaberg cream soda here.
I assume you'd have Bundaberg rum as well. A&W is the one that we get.
There you go. Yeah. Yep, that makes sense.
So yeah, very highly technical discussion to open this one up.
Indeed. Always fun to learn about the cross-cultural stuff.
Right. Yeah. It's like I was watching. I fall into the TikTok well. I think we've spoken about this before, and I go in there at bedtime, and then it's 1 o'clock, and I'm shouldn't have done that. But there was Trevor Noah was talking about this new Lizzo song, and how like the language is different. Like she used some terminology in a song of hers that is quite common with, black culture in America, which is like to spaz, which means to like party. We're gonna have whatever. Now, in Australia and in the UK, like spaz is usually used as a derogatory term for like people with a mental disability or a mental, something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
and so someone pointed that out to Lizzo, and Lizzo was like, I didn't know that. I'm sorry, and she changed the words of the song, and then like everyone piled on because like, why would you do that? Like, and it's like, this is the thing. Like, if someone tells you something is like offensive or it means something different in a different part of the world, it's not like, okay, well, I don't care. It's like, oh, well, I didn't know that. It's about, you know, changing your understanding and broadening your horizons and things like that. So I think, you know, she's absolutely done the right thing to sort of say, okay, I recognize that this is different and I'm just going to change it. Like, I've just gone and changed the words to my popular song because I didn't realize that it had a negative connotation in a different part of the world. And everyone's like, why would you do that? You know, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't have. I don't think I would necessarily tag it as somebody that has a mental disability, but like, if you called somebody a spaz, it certainly wouldn't be a compliment here. It's
Yeah,
like
right.
you're spastic.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
sure.
you're unpredictable, you're crazy sort of
Mhm.
deal. Anyway, hey, let's talk about some Saloon, shall we? You
Saloon.
mentioned that you wanted to talk about Saloon a little bit, so let's talk about it. What do you got? What's
Yeah.
going on?
So I've not used it. This is not a thing that I have used, but it's something that's come up on, you know, when we're on Laravel News, we've talked about it. We've had Sam Curray on our show to talk about this in the past. And what Saloon does is it gives you the ability to kind of encapsulate HTTP requests to third-party services, to external APIs and things like that behind these classes. And so you can have like a class where you define the base URL. For those listening along, this is on stream, so well, Jake can't see this either, but I've got
I'm
it.
looking at it on my screen right now. Yeah.
Okay, cool, yeah. So you've got the ability basically in your application to define a base URL, and then you've got default configurations and all that kind of stuff. But then you create request classes for each of your endpoints, and you define specific endpoints. So you might have an integration with GitHub, and then you'd have like a folder, you know, app services, GitHub base request, which sends you a base URL, and then you've got, or sorry, they have the notion of connectors. So the connector is responsible for setting the base URL and setting up all the scaffolding for that. And then you've got define endpoint, which is where you would specify, like, I need to go in the GitHub example to fetch the activity stream of a repository. And so what I've been thinking of this context. So I work for a financial services company where we do asset finance, and we're in the process at the moment of integrating with all of our lenders that provide APIs. So you would be possibly unsurprised to know this in the financial services world, that lots of things are done by spreadsheet. Like spreadsheets for days, quote calculators, serviceability calculators, all that kind of stuff that determines whether or not you can be lent money is done using, not like, these are not simple, like these are very complex spreadsheets, but a lot of it is just like calculate these values and plug it into a giant matrix and figure out like where you land, and this is, you know, what you can do. So, but for the ones that we're integrating that have APIs, we've kind of got like a very loose structure around how that looks, and then it's essentially re-implementing the same thing over and over again to do a quote and to submit an application to a lender. And so what I'm trying to look at, and the issue that we have is that we're still on Laravel 6 and we're not quite ready to start migrating it. So we can't use things like this, but the notion of this like connector request object is very interesting to me, because I wanted to, what I wanted to talk about was how conceptually you would do this, where you've got like some abstraction that sits on top of the lender itself. And whether it's like, I loosely, I think it's just like an interface. You'd have an interface that's like a get quote, submit application. And that would take our data model, send it through those things, transform it, because each individual lender is going to have their own like, fields that you need to translate to. And so I think what I'm trying to get at is, okay, how do we start from our data structure, pass through some common interface that does the mapping, and then sends the request, gets the response, translates that back into a unified interface, so that when we're creating new lender integrations, it's all the same from a consumption point of view from within our application. Like, all we need to do is say like, this lender, this application, get a quote, and it handles all that transformation internally. And a lot of what we do at the moment, just for historical reasons, for, you know, this is just how the application has been built over time, is just hard coded strings, arrays of like, here's dollar data, square bracket, like this field, this field, this field, and it's doing the mapping in that way, which obviously works. We've built these integrations, we've got a number of them now already. It's just that thinking about long-term scalability, maintainability, testability, all of that kind of stuff gets a bit murky when you want to bring in a new lender. And so having like a standardized set of tests, for example, let's say given this application and this lender, send a request through this interface and you expect to get back this response. And you'd use fixtures or mocks or whatever else to sort of set those up to say, okay, given these inputs, these are the outputs that we expect to come back, and then making sure that we can handle that in a consistent way across the application. And the thing that we're really trying to drive now, especially now that as of this week I've picked up all of the code review for like QA and all of that like technical direction stuff after a while, which is daunting because I've got like a number of projects on the go that I need to get done myself, but also like a backlog of code that needs to be reviewed. So it's just been like the duck on the pond, like the legs frantically kicking to keep myself afloat at the moment. And like going backwards and forwards, and it's like fixing up, okay, well, we've added this new functionality, but we haven't added tests kind of thing. It's like we need to now we need to start testing. And like sending Postman collections is no longer acceptable in terms of like what is a test and what is testable in the context of the application. Like we need to be able to say, that this is going to work to this known set of assertions and expectations, and that isn't going to change from release to release, from feature to feature, from that we can run these things within a CI pipeline and know straight away if something has been broken.
So for sure.
It's kind of like trying to really impress that, and it's in that sticky stage where like we've got tight deadlines and we have to, but it's like if we don't do it now,
always right,
if we don't start doing it now, then the next time, it'll be okay, we're under the pump, we don't have time to do it again, and you just keep kicking the can down the road, and it just doesn't get done. And because there's like not any experience within the team of doing it, a lot of it comes down to like, okay, how do we do this in the first place, and then sort of introducing it in such a way that we're going to get meaningful tests without kind of slowing down our ability to develop features towards these deadlines. So it's been an interesting kind of challenge to go through in terms of getting that all up and running. And it's just, I wonder if, I guess a long way of going about it, what is your sort of thoughts in terms of maybe a loose folder structure hierarchy of like how you would build this out?
I want to make sure
with the knowledge that you can't use Saloon, but the concept broadly is interesting.
So the good thing I think you kind of already have established is like you guys have a relatively strong set of DTOs within your application that I've done a lot of work to document and to make sure that those are consistent, throughout the application. So at what point does your data get sort of packaged up in those DTOs?
So the DTOs that we're using that I've spoken about before is for ingest of a specific application endpoint. So this is a standard for transfer of financial services information between financial institutions, but that's on coming to us. We're not using those DTOs.
Gotcha. Okay.
From our side, so everything we just assume that Eloquent models are the data structure.
Okay, so that's kind of how it works then. So your starting point is you're going to be using an Eloquent model, which is maybe what's the name of the
so you've got an
model, I guess.
Yeah, the application is like the core. And from the application
entity. I was thinking like what's the domain entity, right? Yeah. So application is your domain entity. Okay, so you have your application, and then your application is going to be the thing that is going to be used to then get to request from lenders that they give you a quote for an application, right? And so that
So
application is going to contain all the necessary data, going to be associated with all the other necessary, have all the relationships back to maybe a customer or something like that.
mhm.
And it's going to, basically give you the ability to package up all that data and pass that along through to then finally make a request to these lenders, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
So you have the entity, and then what I'm trying to think about is like you'd probably have like a service, right? Which is sort of a high level abstract concept, which is, get quote,
Mhm.
right? Now at that point, do you see yourself as specifying what lender you're using, or do you just get all of the quotes back from all of the lenders?
So at the point that we're going to get a quote, we typically have an understanding of which ones might service a given customer based on the
Hmm.
criteria. So we say,
Yeah.
okay, out of the, let's say, 50 lenders that we integrate with, these are the three that best fit the application profile for this application. And then we would go and get quotes for three of those lenders. So we
Yeah. So
know,
you'd like, yeah.
so we
Right.
know like
So
lender
you'd
A,
like,
lender B, lender C. These are the ones we want
yep.
to get quotes for. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think the service is kind of the way about it. It's just like obviously there's design patterns and things like that, and there's like specific things like is it a manager, is it a factory, like that kind of stuff where you say, okay, with this application and for these three lenders, go do some massaging of the data, like basically
Each
from the
one of those lenders has their own API though, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So it's essentially like you're writing a little mini SDK for each one of them. The only difference is that like you want to probably, and I don't know with Saloon exactly how you would do that, because for me, the easiest way that I've found to do that is to define a common interface and then make all of my implementations use those same methods and same properties that are being arguments that are being fed to
Right.
that. With Saloon, each request is a different class.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't really know how you do that.
Well, so and this is the thing, right? We'd have the
Unless,
application
go ahead.
here, our entity sitting here, and we've got
Hmm.
the Saloon stuff sitting over here. But
Okay.
there's that bit in the middle where it's like
Yep.
from my controller where I say
Hmm.
like post slash application slash ID slash quote or get quote or whatever you want to call it. And then that takes the ID obviously from the application, and it also
Hmm.
takes like an array of lenders. So we take
Yes.
that
Right.
and then we
Sure.
call some thing in the middle that's like go get quotes, and then that is responsible for delegating, like resolving each of the lenders, like their SDKs,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
calling like okay get quote on each of these.
Yeah, so there's like three things that you need to do basically on each one of those. On each one of those lenders that you're going to be doing, you're going to have a different base URL instead of headers, which is basically your connector, right? So how do they request that I interface with them? Here's the URL that they give me. Here is the headers that they need me to send along to prove that I am who I say I am. Here is any other, accepts JSON, accepts XML, what I mean? Like, how do I do that in particular, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is going to be how your data needs to be transformed in order to be able to send it along to them, right? So that's the second part, right? So how do I, and that could live within the request itself, right? Where it gets the request itself gets an application, and then it says parse that application and put it into a format or into like, a data structure that matches with what the API on the other side is expecting. Then, of course, you're going to make the request. And then the third part is when you get it back, transforming it back into some common interface that is going to be responding back to
Right.
your the rest of your application, right? So yeah, those three things I think are the three things that you kind of have to wrestle with and figure out how
Yeah.
exactly do you do that. Like, is it so? Yeah, the connect, and it really, I mean, like we're using some of the language that Saloons are defined, right? You have the connector, you have the request, and you have the response. Those are the three things that you really are unique for each one of these things. So the application is going to be the same for each one of them. The response is hopefully going to be the same back from each one of them. But those three additional pieces are going to be different for each one of them. And hopefully that shouldn't be too terribly bad. The only time where you might end up with some weirdness around that is, for some APIs that I've dealt with, it's not a single call. Sometimes there's like a an authentication call I have to make
Yeah, you've got to
first,
authenticate
and then
and
they
then send the
give me
request.
a token back. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly, to make my next request with.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not just as simple as saying, okay, request, make your call. It's like,
Right.
well, there's a pre-step to some of them,
Yeah. There
and
might
I
even be a
suppose you could
post
still
step
wrap that up, but
where you
sure,
like
yeah,
make the
exactly.
request for a
Oh,
quote and that sends you back like a token, and then you have to like check, have I got, have you finished? Have you finished? Oh, we finished.
interesting.
So there's that
Gotcha.
kind of thing as well. I mean, I don't know if that's the case. I haven't looked at the lender specific
Which is
integrations,
why,
but that's
too, I
totally a
was
thing
gonna
that could
say
happen.
I would almost do like a chained, like do a job chain sort of thing. I'm guessing these aren't synchronous requests that you're hoping to kick off, right? It's basically give me a quote, and then you say for these three lenders, 1, 2, 3, and then is it a background job that you're going to kick those off to? And then you could do the batch job processing where it's like, you can't do that because you don't have the latest versions of
Correct.
Laravel.
Yeah.
So
So I think I'm fairly sure it all happens like synchronously in the browser, so that's okay. I think
how long
you're
do these APIs typically take to respond?
a couple of seconds. Like it's not. It's
Okay, so
and the
that's
thing
not
is,
bad.
it's
That's
like
actually impressive.
it's kind of expected that these that you sit there and see a loading spinner while this is happening, because that's just how financial services work. So, I think that's probably about where I was thinking. Is like all of this side of the process is kind of the same. It's always going to be a request with a bunch of lender IDs that we map to then classes that handle it. We send that through some manager service class that then goes, okay, for each of these, I need to go and new up this class and then
Yeah,
fire
that'd
off
be
the
like a
request.
factory,
And then I
right?
think this is where we see DTOs again, is that we have like a quote response DTO
Mm.
that then is
Yeah,
responsible for like being the canonical, like this is what we want all of the data to look like when it comes back, so that we can then take
right.
that and then present it in our application. But then each of the lenders could extend from that base thing and define their own like from lender.
Yeah.
So it'd be like a DTO. So you'd have like quote response, which would be abstract, which would define a from lender static constructor.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would take the request from
The
the
response.
lender, the response from the lender, and it would be responsible for then mapping the lender
Mm-hmm.
fields onto the DTO, so
Yeah.
that that when we're handling the response to then display that back to the user, you could just like for each responses as response, and that is a quote response DTO, and then like amount will be there, maximum term, balloon, all of these things would be there in a consistent format, and then each of the individual lender response handlers, like DTO handlers that had extended from that abstract class, would be responsible for mapping it. And that kind of unifies the interface from the consumption point of view to then get that data back.
Yeah, because otherwise this could be a total mess. I mean, I don't know how you would even do that if you didn't have some standard, DTO that you wrapped that sort of response,
Yeah.
or not wrapped, but transformed it to. Because what you want to do obviously is you want to be able to, as much as possible, eliminate conditionals when dealing with these sorts of things. The fewer paths you have to go down, the better. Now there are going to be spots where you have to split off, obviously, but as much as possible, being able to limit that to like a single class, right? So once you've specified what that is, here's this lender. Okay, well, I know how to take an application and transform that for that lender. It's no longer conditional at that point. You've told it, this is the lender. Here I go. Okay, now I'm in with the class, and the class knows what it's getting. The class knows how to handle itself. But I think the mistake people make is when they try and do something like, we're going to have a single thing that is going to be responsible for determining the connector, and then also conditionally say like, okay, if it's this lender, then make this little change. And if it's this lender, then do this little change, all in one place. That's a disaster. That's a freaking disaster. And it's really difficult to test too.
I think
so. Yeah, I would break them all out into their own classes.
Yeah, people are kind of, from what I've observed personally, is that people are kind of scared of creating new classes, because then they get this paralysis around like, what do I call this? Where do I put it? Like, and I like JMac's kind of methodology with that, is just put it in like a BLA folder, or like just like doesn't matter what it's called, just shove it all there until the pattern reveals itself and then move it,
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
Because once you have an understanding of, okay, these are all the things that are the same, these are the things that are different, this is how we need to group them up. And it might just be that it's like, you know, lenders slash quotes, lenders slash submissions, and then inside of that they've all got their own like duplicated folder structure, but it's like lenders slash quotes slash lender A slash DTOs and requests and responses, and then you've got like your thing in there that is responsible for like the quote response handling and all of that kind of stuff.
I mean, you even honestly could. I mean,
You could all have it in a flat
you know,
folder structure, but like
you totally could start out that way. You know, and the reason I say that is so I've been working with our new developer trying to do this as much as possible. For him, you know, what a holdup has been is he'll get partway through and he'll look at it and say, "Ah, this is messy. I should clean this up." And so he'll clean it up, and then but the feature still isn't done yet.
yeah,
So now he starts adding on to it again, and it's like, but I've already made some decisions that are hard to kind of go back on. So now I've really lost a lot of the flexibility that I can have as far as what solutions are available to me. So I told him, you know, trying to help him understand like the red green refactor whole thing. I was like, dude, write the ugliest code you can write to just get it to work. Like the illustration I gave is sort of like if you have a person who's like working with clay and they're trying to like make a pot, right? They don't start with the bottom of the pot and then try and add more clay after. Like they put all of it on at the very beginning. You got to get all of it out there first before you can start shaping it. Like you just got to have the code before you can start making it look good and even breaking it out and abstracting. Otherwise, you're going to make decisions that are going to influence or otherwise hinder your possibilities that you have available. So it might even be worth if you literally just, I know I just said a minute ago, don't do the whole conditional thing, but just to be able to see it all in one place, if you did just chuck it all in one spot and then be like, okay, here are the common things. We know we're going to extract from this, but let's just get it all in the same spot first and then start pulling it apart after we see the common patterns that are there.
Yeah. 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 I think that's like, we're kind of there. Like I have seen some of this abstraction, but we like static helpers and static like service locators and things like that. So anytime we need to like potentially create some duplicate, like anytime we have something that may be used in multiple times, we create like this static class that's got a whole bunch of getters on it and I'm like, okay, we're going to nip that in the bud, because every time you do that, they go and like start querying the database, and it's like, these are those like quote dangers that other people
have blamed Laravel
for, like, because it makes it so easy to do this stuff that, you know, it's obviously the framework's fault, and the framework lends itself to it for sure, but it also allows you to basically do whatever the heck you want, however you want to do it. And that just happens to be the simplest way. But we've been fighting with like slow pages and like N+1 queries and things like that just crop up all the time because I've seen these things like that. And so part of it, I think, is
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you mean. So like, are they using just static, like public static functions?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Or they're using...
Like I say it's a static class. It's basically a class that only has static methods in it. So they'll have like public static get lender name, and that's responsible for taking like a slug and then going and querying the database to go and get the name for that slug, as opposed to making that part of like the entry point of the application in the controller that says, okay, I need to do this, and then like lazy load with lender or whatever to get the name, and then like, and I'm getting to the point now, it's like, okay, we'll put an accessor on the model, you know, because we don't store the logo. The logo is derived from like a specific string. So it's like, you know, lender name dot JPEG. And so they've created like this static method on the, like in this static class that takes a string, queries the database, gets the lender, then concatenates these things together. I'm like, if you've already got the lender, put this on the lender model as an accessor to do that.
Right.
And that way, if it ever changes, it's all in one place. It means you can test it in one place. And it means that if in the future we go from using a computed value, a computed property for the lender using an accessor, to storing the logo as a field on the database, you don't have to go and update a whole bunch of code to change like how this is happening, because you just reference that field, you delete the accessor kind of thing.
Totally.
So, there's just like a lot of these things which are probably brought in from other places. I know that we've spoken about some patterns that I've seen in the code base that are like very CodeIgniter inspired, where it's like instead of creating like a class that does something, you have a class that news up another controller that then
Yeah,
calls
yeah.
methods on a controller, which I've never
Ooh,
used CodeIgniter, but
yes.
I've heard that that's
Oh,
a
that's totally it.
CodeIgniterism. And so
Yeah,
I'm like, this is fine. But number one, don't call it a controller because that's not what it is within
exactly.
Laravel. And number two, use, dependency injection, use the container, use the app, make or whatever else. Don't new these things up because then we get places where we're integrating with box.com and
Okay.
in development in testing we don't actually want to hit that. We want to use a fake, but because we're doing new box whatever as opposed to resolving from that from the container, there's no way to mock that, to swap that out, like
Yeah,
because in testing you would just swap that out
yeah,
with a null object essentially, or just something that
yeah,
returns static values. So um now that I'm starting to see more and more of the code, and it's hard for me because I see these things and I say, let's not do it like this. Let's do it, you know, the proper way. And
sure.
it's like it comes back on the developers that are like, you've been here 5 minutes. Why are you making us change the things that we've been doing the whole time? And it's like, well, we're at the point now where we need to sort of start thinking about much bigger scale. We just migrated to AWS 2 weeks ago, and this coming Monday, which will be yesterday by the time this episode comes out, we're gonna start seeing a huge influx of users, and I'm like, this stuff ain't gonna cut it anymore because it'll get us so far because we've over provisioned our application services and our EC2 instances, and like everything's
Yeah, yeah,
hugely over provisioned at the moment, but throwing money at the problem is not going to solve underlying architectural issues. It's not going to solve underlying technological decisions that we made in the past. And we can't keep repeating those things to move forward.
yeah. I had this exact situation with an app that was built. I had a part of it. Um, I had a part in building the initial portion where users would sign in. So like I handled it was like OAuth back in the day and when it was still sort of complicated and sort of the basic bones of it. But then they added this group feature that would track all these views. It was almost like an analytics thing. It would track all these views to a link that you had provided and all that stuff, right? So you could do that individually, but you could also be a part of a group. So think like, okay, if I want to find all of the visits for all the users that belong to this group, but only from the time that they joined this group, because I can't count them for all the ones that they did before they joined this group. Like you could see how those queries could quickly get out of control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we did way over provision this thing,
Yeah.
and continued to do so. And at some point, we literally ran out of like it was not worth the money that it was costing to keep up with it. We literally had to like turn off the group feature. It was like, this is insanity.
Yeah.
Like it was crashing the server, and
Yeah.
it was just couldn't do it. And it was like, it was going to cost us like $5,000 a month to keep this thing going. It was like, it's not worth it. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So you're correct. I mean, it will work for a while as long as your needs aren't too great. But there is a ceiling to that thing, and at some point, it becomes more expensive to run the server than it does to have the developers fix the problem.
Yeah. It's the same kind of concept of like you can't outrun a bad diet.
Yeah, sure, right, yeah.
If you are consuming more calories than
If you're
than
eating
you
root
are
beers, or if you're
at 10
drinking
o'clock
root
at
beer
night,
floats
yeah,
at 11 o'clock, yeah.
right. If you're consuming more calories than you're burning, like it doesn't, you can like the root beer float is like 4 hours of running or whatever else, that kind of thing. It's the same kind of thing with data. Like if you're running 500 queries on a page when you could be running 4, you can throw money at the problem only so far, until suddenly you go, well, we can't afford to spend any more money on more resources. We need to, and like I recognize this very early on, and I've been saying this basically since I started. I'm like, we can throw hardware at the problem now just to get us by, because we were kind of on tight timelines in terms of like we've got to move by the 1st of July. We've got to get onto AWS. We've got to be ready for this influx of users. That's fine. So we over provisioned everything heaps. But if you've got like 1,000 users hit your application, and they all hit the same endpoint, and that endpoint is running 300 queries to return some data. That's, 300 users by 1,000 queries. Oh,
Yikes.
sorry, 300 queries by 1,000 users. Like,
Yeah.
it's going to be problematic. And this is where like those static classes are problematic. Yes, you get the desired outcome. You get the result that you're looking for, but it means that you've loaded the application. The application has loaded the lender. The lender has then gone, oh, I need to go and get the name. So I need to go and like call this static method, which then queries the database 2 more times to then come back.
Yikes.
And it's like, do we not see, yes, it works. Understand that it works. Can we keep doing this? Absolutely not. And so it's like, it's having that conversation, and it's like, this is not about how you're writing code. This is not about you. This is about the long-term scalability and maintainability of this application. If we can fix these things, like the permission system that we have makes me very sad, because it does query and requery, and it's like every time you do a check, like it doesn't cache. Sorry, it uses the array cache because of some complication. I don't know the exact specifics of it, but they couldn't use like the file cache or something like that. So they use the array cache, and they say like cache : driver or whatever it is, parentheses array. And then they say remember, and then they give it the key, and then they say remember this for 24 hours. I'm like, you can't remember something in the array cache for 24 hours because the array cache only exists for the duration of that request for that user.
That request. Yeah, that's what they use, or the array cache in like testing.
Right.
It's like,
so
it's not actually doing anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's little things like that. It's like we need to make it work, so we make it work for now. But like they've never really had any insight into, no debug bar, because we're using, like, it's all API. There's nowhere to put debug bar. You never look at that, right? You can't put debug bar into an API because it just doesn't work. So there have been scenarios where I've needed to profile, where I've dipped into Telescope, which is beautiful, because it means that I can like run that in Postman, hit that endpoint, and look at Telescope and see what just happened and go, holy moly, that just ran 600 queries. Why? And so, I think we spoke about, I tweeted about it for sure, that we got like an endpoint from 8 seconds down to 1 second just by removing N+1 queries.
Yeah.
So, those kinds of things, you just need to, and like, it just hasn't been a factor for consideration, because it's just been like, build this thing. And now it's like, if you want to keep this train rolling, we've got to start thinking about it now before it gets out of hand. Because
the thing is too, is like, once they're taught that stuff, like it's easy to remember. It's just like when the only goal in front of you is hit the deadline.
Sure.
Then yeah, that does happen, right? It's just like, just get it working. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's when but the eventually
concept becomes the production deployment.
Yep. Exactly.
So yeah, it's just like, and they're receptive to it, 100%. They go, I get it.
That's awesome. That's key.
Which is great. It makes me feel a little bit less bad about telling them not to do the thing that they've been doing for the last 3 years. Because like, it's hard as an outsider coming into a business where people have been there for 3 years and you've been here for 6 months, and you're like, we can't do this anymore. And they're like, why not? We've been doing it for 3 years. It's like, well, because no one has really looked at it this way.
Yeah.
And like the CTO, to his credit, he's been fantastic at making sure that we build like exactly what we need. There's diagrams and there's like ERDs, and everything is like
impressive.
Super well thought out. Like it's probably the most comprehensively documented and thought out application that I've ever worked on.
Incredibly rare. That's incredibly rare.
But this is the thing, like, we don't have any of the other stuff. So it's very well documented. We know everything that should happen. It's just that we don't have like the test in place, the automated test, to say that this is definitely what's happening. We were adding some new functionality the other day, and I was reviewing the code. I went, we don't have any tests for this at all. Like I spent like 3 months putting tests in. I'm like, oh, this is an area of the code that we didn't document because, we didn't add tests for, or I didn't add tests for. Let's not say I didn't add tests for, because I was only putting in tests in place for the public API. like the things that we had documented as part of the public API. But there is parts of the public API that are read-only that are internal to our application. So there are things that are like seeded into the application, but they are not. And like any user of the application with an API key can read those resources, but they can't create, they can't update, they can't delete. So I'm like, oh, I better go and backfill these tests because we're adding to it now. So now is the time. Like we need to have the guarantee that we need to know that these things that we say are read-only are actually read-only. And that was when I discovered that amongst all of those resources that should have been read-only, there was a little lonely resource that was not read-only. And so where I was expecting like a 405 method not allowed, I was getting back a 403. I'm like, well, we shouldn't be getting a 403 because that there should be nothing handling that code, that request to send back a 403. I'm like, oh, we have an oversight here. Like this endpoint. Unfortunately, like that's not the most egregious thing in the world in terms of like I'm expecting a 405, but I got a 403. The end result is the same. You were not allowed to carry out that action. But when we're expecting a 405, especially when we've got like, so we have these resources, we've got an array of them. There's like 5 or 6. And so we use a data provider to iterate through each of those resources for each of the user roles. So we've got an admin, we've got a user, we've got like different users. And like each of those should be able to read, but none of them should be allowed to create, update, or delete. And so we do this using data providers because all the tests are exactly the same. Like there's no variation.
Yeah.
And so when you're doing that and you say, okay, go run the test in this folder, that they all go, like, okay, for each of the 6 or 7 user roles, go and run these 5 tests, create, read, update, delete, and make sure you get these responses. But when you start seeing something that you don't expect, you have to go and figure out why. So, we're getting there. It's just, and the tests are very slow. I'm trying to figure out the best way of running them because they take the full suite on my MacBook, which is the old 16-inch Intel, the work one, not the M1. Takes 16 minutes to run the test suite.
Oof, boy.
And there is a memory leak in, like, it's some combination of PHP 7.4, Laravel 6, and Symfony 4, and PHP Unit. There's like something, there is a bug in PHP that has been open since like 2018 that is still exists in PHP 8.1.
Oh, gosh.
Hasn't been fixed. So there's no way around this short of upgrading Laravel and PHP and getting to a point where the fixes within those 3-4 places upstream at least minimize the impact of this bug. But we need the test in place to do that first. So it's like, okay, so now we're starting to talk about setting up pipelines in Bitbucket to run the test. And like they'll fail, but it's not gonna stop us from deploying code or anything because all that part of the process is still going to be manual. We'll still be able to just do deploys manually for the time being. But it's like, how do I get this 16-minute test suite that on my MacBook is 16 minutes that uses like 3.5 gig of RAM? How do I get that to run in CI? Like, how do I get that to finish?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Because that's a big challenge. It's like if you can't do that in a reasonable amount of time, nobody's going to do it.
Correct.
Nobody's going to do it either.
I mean, the expectation
That's
is
a tough
that
one.
at least you're running. But the thing is, if you're making changes in like this core bit that's run by data providers, and you can't,
You kind of got to do it. Yeah.
then like they write the code, they send it for pull review. I run the test suite. And I'm like, there's errors here. I'm like, well, I couldn't run the test. I'm like, well, see, that doesn't help anyone. And you can't be upset at them for not running the test because
Totally.
it's just not capable of doing it. So
And the feedback loop is just so slow.
yeah. So I think what I think is going to work, and what I was running some benchmarks on before, was to split up the test suite. So we've got like the lint, which goes through and runs like composer check style, which goes and runs PHP CS fixer with a -- check or whatever it is. That will fail the build straight away. Like if your code is not conforming to code style, we're not going to run the rest. Then I'm going to run the unit tests separately because they will run really quickly. I say really quickly. It's still like 4 minutes, but it's 1,600 odd tests. And then these automated kind of data provider built ones, I'll do as a separate thing. And then there's another set of like feature tests that I will run separately again. So essentially my test suite, I'm going to split up into 3 using PHP Unit's group annotations. So I can say like
Mm-hmm.
the first test exclude
Yeah.
this
Yep.
comma, and then like, and so I've just grouped them as like slow.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
then another step in the pipeline will be to run the slow ones, and then another step in the pipeline will be to run the resource ones. And theoretically, I can run those
You could
three
do them
in
in parallel. Yeah. Yeah.
So, one takes 6 minutes, one takes 4 minutes, one takes 7 minutes. Okay, well that part of the
7
test
minutes
will
total
take
then.
7
Yeah.
minutes total instead of 20 minutes
We
in
ended up
death.
we ended up doing that in one of our larger applications. One of the ones you worked on, actually, Wilbur Pay. Yeah, we had when we went from Travis CI to GitHub Actions. Travis CI used to run our unit tests, then it'd run our Dusk tests, and then so what we did now is GitHub Actions has Dusk tests running separately from our unit tests, and it's way faster. Yeah, way faster.
Yeah.
And that's huge. So yep.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. I'm kind of in two minds about it, because I want to get it set up because we kind of need it for assurance for the stuff that we're doing at the moment. But I also want to move to GitHub, and I'd like to do that first if I can, so I don't have to set it up on Bitbucket and then have to go back and set it up on GitHub again a second time. So we'll see what happens. But it's just busy. And then we did the AWS migration last week, which went fine. My piece was like 16 minutes start to finish, from like including backing up the existing database, migrating it to the new server, and kicking everything over. And then there was
you finished migrating in less time than it took to run the tests.
Yeah. And then and then the rest of the team had to go through and do like the manual test to make sure that all of the pieces were working, that and like it was fine. We had done it once. We'd migrated the entire application to staging and run through everything, so we knew what the test plan was. It was just a time-consuming thing that we had to go through and do all that stuff. So it was like a bit over 2 hours that it took to do that. But that process went fine. The integration that I had been working on that we had deployed on the 1st of July, we've been just like doing little spot fires and bug fixes and things like that, just for bits that we hadn't tested, that we didn't have sample data for. There's some inconsistencies between like the spec and what the external party is sending us. So that's going to go into full circulation on Monday, and that's going to see a quite significant increase in traffic. So I'm going to be on the edge of my seat most of the week, just like in case we start, because we're going to start seeing, this is the thing, you push something into production and you can test and cater to things as best you can. And we kind of try and handle edge cases and bugs. Like if something slips through the cracks and we don't know how to handle it, we will swallow the entire payload, we'll store it in S3, we'll log it like this request ID failed with, whatever the error was. And that way we can go and like proactively see these things. Okay, I need to fix that. Go and put the test in, put the fixes in. But there's like stuff that they've been sending us that's just invalid. And so it's like, well, we just, until they fix it, there's nothing we can do. And of course, once they fix, because they're in this big .NET application, which is like slow and red tapey and like corporate and enterprise kind of thing. Like their deploys take 20 minutes to run kind of thing. And they have to go through the full like review process. You've got to go through the steps. You've got to get it approved. You've got to get it signed off. Yada yada. And then by the time they deploy it, it's like, okay, now you can go and fix this really quickly on your end because people need to use it. So it's fun and games. But that gives me some clarity, especially that Saloon stuff. Obviously, we can't use Saloon right now. It'd be nice to be able to use that because that would just be a straight swap. But that kind of idea, especially like the DTOs. DTOs and value objects, I've seen a great use for, like in this lot of work that I've been doing, being able to just kind of know that the data that I have inside of my application is already valid, and not having to worry about like validating it anywhere.
Yeah, like, exactly. That's always the huge pain.
Once I have it massaged into the format prescribed by the DTO, I know that everything there is valid, because the DTO will have like failed ages ago if it was not valid. So that's something like if you're handling external data to your application that can come from different places and you want to massage it into like a common format, DTO is beautiful. And then, those are the takeaways, I think.
Frank de Jong actually has a really good post on something like this called it's on his blog, Frank on Software. But he talks about, where does his validation live? And this was a huge thing that I had with one of my previous developers, where he would literally validate all the way down the chain. Every step he was going to use something, he was checking if it was valid,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just super cumbersome. And what it ended up doing is it muddied up the code everywhere, right? You're always checking over and over and over and over and over again, and then every test was checking over and over and over and over and
Right.
over again if it was right. And it's like, if you pass in a object, if you pass in a value object, you pass in a DTO, then you know it's good, and so you don't have to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Frank talks about some of this, like, where does this live, and then he talks about basically shapes and types. So how quickly do I need to get it out of the request and into a DTO, right? And so he talks about that. I won't talk about all of it here, but maybe we can share it in the show notes. It's a really good one. I'll send it to you in our Telegram chat here, but I think it'd be helpful for sure. Hey, we should probably wrap this one up. We're getting close to an hour here, so
Let's do it.
any final words?
No, I think that's it.
Cool.
Maybe if
We got some other fun
try
stuff.
Spider, you should tweet me and tell me what you think.
Okay, I will. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll try it with my kids this week. We'll see. Next time, I would love to talk about using S3 to upload directly without using Laravel. So, you can use Laravel to handle large file uploads, right? But what you have to do is you have to change your upload max file size and a couple of these different things to allow your application to handle large files, and then it also eats up resources on your server.
Yeah, uploading
but
to you,
you
and
can
then you uploading to S3 as well.
exactly
Yeah, the two-step.
exactly. And so you can get around that by using pre-signed put requests and something like FilePond or DropZone or something like that. There are a couple caveats to it, though, and some things that we discovered that I think are worth mentioning to anybody else who might be interested in doing something like that. We basically wanted to duplicate or replicate Dropbox file requests, where you essentially send somebody an email and say, hey, you have a large file that you can't send through email because of email size limits.
Yeah.
Can you put it here instead? And then when they put it there, it uses S3 to upload it, just like I was talking about, without hitting Laravel. And then what we do is exactly gives them a signed URL through an email to, because you can't attach that to an email, you have to send a signed URL to allow them to download it. So anyway, we sort of replicated that and learned some cool lessons along the way. So I'd love to talk about that a little bit too. And SES emailing. There's some interesting things I learned about that as well. So next time, we'll talk about those next time. And it'd be fun. Okay, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us today. Find show notes for this episode at northmeetsouth.audio/122. If you like the show, please rate it up in your podcatcher of choice. 5 stars would be much appreciated. Hit us up on Twitter at Michael Dorinda or at Jacob Bennett or at North South Audio. All right, folks. Until next time, we will see ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.